Hi and good afternoon. On behalf of the USC Dornsife Center for Leadership by Women of Color and Ready to Launch, I'm thrilled to welcome those of you who are in the room and those of you who are online to this incredible event. Forward Together, Building Political Power for Women of Color. We've got folks in person and we've got folks online, a total of about 100 folks in combination, and we thank you for joining us no matter what your modality. My name is Marie Hancock Alfaro, and I'm the director of the Center for Leadership by Women of Color, and I'm excited about what's in store for you, so I'm going to try and be brief. CLWoC was founded in March 2020. Yes, that's right. We literally got our seed funding the month the entire country shut down. But as women of color do, we persevered, and we made it work for us. Our mission is to conduct high-quality research about the difference women of color's leadership makes in any sector of society. We are home to the Kamala Harris Project, a national group of scholars tracking all aspects of the first woman of color vice president of the United States, and we participate in community collaborations like the one that you are attending today. Before I do anything else, I want to first thank our CLWoC team who have worked so hard on this event. Alex Smith, our Community Engagement Project Specialist, Anthony Garza, our Operations Project Specialist, Chanel Stewart, our Research Project Specialist, and our newest team member, Brandy Martinez, our Administrative Assistant. They've met almost weekly for months to make this happen, and I'm so grateful to them. And I'm equally grateful to our community partners, Charlotte White and Erica Liebman, the co-founders of Ready to Launch. Now, it's been a pleasure to collaborate with Ready to Launch over the past year to provide high-quality programming to empower the next generation of women of color leaders in politics and government. When Charlotte and Erica first shared their mission 2 summers ago now to focus on growing and diversifying the staff pipeline in politics and public service, and focusing on self-identifying women from historically marginalized communities, CLWoC's growing partnership became a necessity. I'm also proud to say that they are both members of the Trojan family. Our first collaboration was in September 2021 for a virtual panel discussion titled Leading Behind the Scenes, Women of Color Staff in Government. For this virtual discussion, we welcomed 4 women of color who have experience leading on city and county levels. Our panelists, Frederica McGee from Senator Holly Mitchell's office, Jennifer Barraza from Councilmember Kevin De Leon's office, Mary Hodge from Mayor Eric Garcetti's office, and Jessica Caloza, who is now with California Attorney General Rob Bonta's office, shared their stories of how they first started their career in government and public service, the unique challenges they've faced as they've navigated these spaces in government, and practical advice for those seeking to enter this field. Our second collaboration, we co-hosted another virtual panel in January titled Strengthening the Pipeline for Women of Color Staff in Politics and Government. Dr. Christian Jogi Phillips, Assistant Professor of Political Science and International Relations here at USC, and author of Nowhere to Run, Race, Gender, and Immigration in American Elections, moderated this important discussion about key barriers that need to be addressed. Jess Hwang from Pay Our Interns, Jessica Anjima from Arena, and our own Charlotte White gave great advice. Participants also learned about the diversity of pathways towards this work. Now, you may ask yourselves, why do we focus on women of color? Well, women of color entrepreneurs represent almost half of all the businesses owned by women in this country and generate close to $400 billion in revenues. 2018 was the year of women of color being elected to Congress, and, as our keynote speaker can tell you, the year of women of color voters that made all the difference in the world. There are about 12 million women and girls of color in California alone. We vote, we make purchasing decisions, we found businesses, and we lead major nonprofits and governments. Women of color don't lead just like everyone else. There are distinctive experiences that women of color bring to the table, and you will hear much more about that today. So I'm pleased and honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Aimee Allison, founder and president of She the People. Aimee is a writer, democratic innovator, and visionary champion of racial and gender justice. She's the founder and president of She the People, the nation's leading organization dedicated to an America redefined and inspired by women of color. We were just talking about its location in Oakland, and there's something about Oakland that makes this so exciting. Renowned for her national efforts to build inclusive multiracial coalitions, Aimee organized and moderated the nation's first ever presidential forum for women of color, attended by presidential candidates and more than 1,000 women from across the country, garnering major national press. So just think about that. If you are one of the 12 million women of color in California, women and girls in California, for the first time this past election, you got to see questions asked by people like you, concerned about issues that you're concerned about. That's big. Her early experience growing up in a multiracial family and searching for belonging in mostly white communities honed her ability to build bridges with others, and often marginalized, others who are often marginalized and dismissed. Her work is firmly grounded in finding shared history and a common vision to create new political and cultural pathways to change. She is at work on several groundbreaking media projects highlighting the legacy and history-making impact of women of color as the vanguards for multiracial solidarity and democracy. And as someone who wrote a book about this in 2011, this is a woman after my own heart. I had to stop myself from fangirling too much. Without further ado, I present to you the illustrious Aimee Allison.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be at USC at the center that focuses on women of color leadership. And in some ways, this is a full circle moment. It was 4 years ago when we were on the brink of a very pivotal election in 2018. Remember, at that time, Trump had been in the White House for over a year. The language that he used about Latinos, about Black people, about Black women in particular, the ways that he described the people who lived in America was deeply upsetting to those of us who shared a different kind of vision, that understood that those of us who were the most likely to be ignored and dismissed, most likely to be dehumanized, most likely to not receive services and support from the government to whom we pay taxes, and least likely to see people that look like ourselves in positions of power. Those of us who looked at politics, who looked at the dynamic of the political ecosystem and saw how did we get to where we are. Those of us who understood the term women of color is incredibly powerful. It's not a racial identity. It's a political identity of solidarity that was honed in the 1970s at the nation's first and only National Women's Conference. And it was then in Houston, Texas, and then in 2018, where so many women of color from across politics and organizing, from institutions and regular old moms and sisters and aunts, have stepped fully into our political possibility and power. And the way that we do that is we find each other. And we tell a new story, not only about ourselves and what's possible for ourselves, but a new story about this country and who matters. From when She the People started in 2018 till now, we've seen some incredible advances, and we've seen the possibility of more and more people, more and more women of color, being seen and heard in a new way. You look at the number of firsts, and I'm just going to take you back a week and a half. When we heard then candidate Biden promise that when he had the opportunity, he was going to nominate the first Black woman on the Supreme Court, many of us understood the power of making that promise. And 2 years to the day, he nominated who is now Justice Jackson. We saw the way that this eminently qualified, very experienced, more experienced in the last 4 nominees to the Supreme Court, was a person who comes with a public defender background, which is unique to the court, where she has defended regular people. And her lived experience as a Black woman. We've never been represented in that branch of government in all the hundreds of years of U.S. history, and we saw not only that she's would be, such a gift to America to have a lifetime appointment in the Supreme Court, but we also saw the way that she was treated. We saw the way she was interrupted. We saw the way, the tone, like, you're very articulate, and we understood the insult that was. And deeply we felt that although she comes ready to lead and eminently qualified, that there's still a prevalence of dismissing women of color who stand for leadership, even when nominated, even when ready to lead, and it has to do with our culture. There's a tolerance to dismissing the power and influence of women of color, and Black women in particular, because of the role that Black women play, high vote turnout, very, in terms of communities, heavily prone to organizing and influencing in progressive legislation. Black women are very important and very threatening to the status quo and a political system that was set up without us in mind, excluded us from the day one. And so on that public stage, we saw white guy after white guy try to dehumanize and dismiss this remarkable leader. So what do we do in a moment where we're just so close to being in a position of power, and no one person can do everything or be everything in a democracy, but we knew how important her success was? Part of what we need to do is to make sure that we build power so it is possible for us to be in the halls of influence, political power, where we get to determine the kind of country that we are, and that this country reflects the values of our community. And truly, we need to defend our personhood. We are burdened as women of color in the pursuit of political power for defending personhood. And it wasn't until, you remember this moment, Senator Cory Booker said, "You are worthy." I don't know about you, but those words hit me deeply, because we knew that phrase cut through all the ways that they were that these Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee were trying to say that she wasn't. You are worthy. And part of our challenge in 2022 is to not only look to each other, to other women of color, to reinforce and support our readiness to lead, our capacity to govern, the strength of our vision, the fact that we are patriotic Americans, that the whole country needs us, that the old way is crumbling. We see it happening around us. And we are ready and have to build power in the face of that. So when we think about the challenge to power, we have to start looking at what the possibilities are. There's different kinds of power. Part of what we need to do, and when we build power, is to take a look around. And I say California is a good place to start. It's not just in California, but other places like Georgia and Florida and Texas that we've worked. Women of color are the majority of women in those states, in our state. And that there isn't any one group that's the majority. Pretty soon our country, almost everywhere, in almost every state, is going to have a majority people of color. those of us who have been marginalized and told in 1,000 ways we aren't worthy, or we're to be dismissed or ignored when it comes to what our government, who our government values. And yet now we're in this position where we can look at the possibilities differently. If we start to look at a place like California and say, look, no one group is going to end homelessness and make it affordable to live. No one group is going to be able to make a community college affordable or have a quality, safe education for young people. No one group is going to be able to make sure that people make livable minimum wage. No one group can do that, but together we have tremendous and remarkable power. So for us, it's looking at and acknowledging who actually lives in this country and the way that we build a common set of values across race. Because the thing that ails the country right now, the thing that we saw, the dangerous, ugly display January 6th of last year, where white supremacists claiming the American flag busted down the doors of halls of Congress demanding to overturn a free and fair election, that is an indication of where our country could go without the leadership of women of color. And we have to build a set of values based on a common shared love of our own people and others. The heart for justice, to make justice a law of the land, to make the American democracy live up to its greatest potential. And in order to do that, we must build power. So power looks like us believing that it's possible. It's a shift in consciousness for ourselves and the entire country. You couldn't imagine in 2017, 2018, the term women of color in a political context was not used. When they talked about the women's vote, it centered on white women. When they talked about the black vote, it centered on black men. And Asian American and Pacific Islander women were not counted, were not tracked, no data. Latinas, who are distinct from the dudes in political hopes and dreams, and a huge portion of so many states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, were not considered an important enough group of voters to report on and measure what we want. So political power in 22 and beyond has to be built on seeing and hearing us, and built on the capacity for us to build connections across race. And the very thing that caused people to dismiss us and tell us that we aren't worthy, we don't have the money, we may not have gone to a fancy school, our family might not have papers or speak English at home, all the things that were reasons to tell us we aren't worthy are the very things that qualify us for leadership. All the things that they use telling us we're not worthy are the very things to qualify us for leadership. We are who America needs because we look like America in 2022 and the future. And the wonderful thing is, the thing that we feel like as women that makes us vulnerable, the way that we build power, which looks like building with, not power over, looks like crying when you see something that breaks your heart, those things that are associated with being vulnerable. The old way says that that's weak, but the new way says that women of color build power based on their vulnerability. The candidates that She the People supports this year come from lots of different backgrounds, different professions, different sets of experiences. Some are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. Some were Black Lives Matter activists that came up through movement. But all of them have the characteristics of leadership that America needs. And that's the place from which we build power. The final thing I'll say before we have this more open conversation is that we can win. We can win. We can win in places where we were not counted as important as voters, where our organizing prowess and expertise was overlooked, where political donors and political parties didn't think we were important, and there was this overwhelming focus on a shrinking pool of moderate and conservative white voters as being the most important people to listen to. Those things are changing. Those things are changing in places, not just in California, where you have a very interesting mayor's race, because there's not that many black women mayors in this country still, but in places like North Carolina, in places like Kentucky. Kentucky is where, Rand Paul faces Charles Booker, but he also, in Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was murdered by police, there's a woman who was an activist. She was only the second black woman in the Kentucky state legislature, and she's running for Congress. Listen, the things that we have when we build across race, given our capacity for organizing and the very thing that makes us win, which is our ability to influence the people around us and to work across race, those things together can overcome a tradition of shutting us out. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have to not only believe in our own power, but work to build power from the very things that are our specialty. The beauty and the love and the vision that women of color represent for ourselves and our communities is the thing that America needs so badly. So I just want to thank you for sharing some of my words and perspective, and I look forward to talking more with you.
Aimee, thank you so much. I'd love to open it up to the audience and see if anybody has any questions for Aimee after her keynote.
Okay, that's how it works. Thank you so much for that keynote. Just so much of what you said resonated. I think probably for a lot of us watching both the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings, but also just watching all the vitriol that's been aimed at women of color like Kamala Harris. Like, sometimes I just watch them and I'm so in awe of their strength, but also there's a part of me that wonders, what impact it has on the mental health of women who are putting themselves out there. And sometimes it makes me scared that people will see that and not want to go for some of these positions. So how do we start having, I don't see that conversation a lot about mental health and self-care and solidarity. How do we start kind of creating that safe space for these women and having that conversation so that people aren't discouraged and deterred, and so that we can support each other?
Yeah, it's a beautiful, actually very loving question. For those of us, and I have some friends in the audience that have run for office, and I've run for office, it's brutal. It can be brutal, especially when you're not the anointed one, where the political party doesn't say, that's the one you should write a $600 or $2,000 check to. That's the one who should, I'm going to introduce you to my friend the reporter. That's the one we're going to do some events for. And it takes a lot to run. But my experience is that women of color who are attracted to public service would do it anyway in some other form. We don't do it because it's easy. We do it because it needs to be done. And my favorite kind of candidates come from movement and organizing, which is also backbreaking work. I think as we're building power, we know we're the least represented in every level of government. So what do we do for the individuals who stand for office? More and more women of color need to be plugged into or create networks. People who will give them $60, $100, cultivate networks of their own for support. My best friend was on the school board in in Oakland for 2 terms. And when she decided she was going to run, her daughter was in middle school. She said, "This is terrible." I said, "Well, you should run." She said, "I should run. How do I run?" I said, "Listen, you go through these training programs, you build your network, but the most important thing is to surround yourself with people who love you anyway." We're taught in this country that it's a bad thing to lose an election. But actually, what we're doing is part of a movement. We're connected to the godmothers who came, lived, and died so that we had an opportunity to run for office. And it doesn't end on election day. So the more that we can show love and support to women of color, not just in the personal level, but it's like helping prepare people and helping support them while they run and after they run. That helps people to figure out what their proper role is. I know that's a big focus of She the People is, for people who are running, we're supporting 22 candidates right now, and for, maybe 6 will get through the primaries. Primaries are brutal for women of color because of the structural barriers, money, and, this talk about people being electable or they're difficult to work with. There's lots of tools to try to defeat us. And I think, of the other candidates who don't get through the primary, we have to have a relationship with them. And there was a recent mayor's race where one of the other candidates didn't make it, but called me. People forget about candidates a week or 2 after the election. They move on, but it's that ongoing relationship which will help the candidate to both recover from a grueling election, but also be able to feel valued, and to understand that they have a role.
So we have one more question from Jubilee on Zoom, so I'm going to read it out. Thank you, Jubilee. How did you get started in your career and overcome the everyday obstacles that come with working in this career as a woman of color?
My first job was a combat medic in the Army. I learned about racial and gender injustice at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Why were there so many black women so many poor women that were in the military with me? Why was this the only way that a lot of us could think about getting an education? Why was this the government program that we had access to? And it was a lot of sharing stories, they were greasing my scalp to put over my cap. All of that experience when I was really young helped me to understand the nature of politics and power. Now, since then, I had a lot of different jobs. I was in a high school teacher, taught history in a bilingual classroom in Redwood City, which is in the peninsula in California. I did radio. I did a bunch of things. I was a political director for a mayoral candidate in Oakland. But I think for me, until I formed She the People, which was an idea that I had, look, we need to build political power for women of color specifically, and we became the only national group that did that. And it wasn't until I went around a group of women, we actually went to Cuba for this, because it was like 20 of us, and I'd had this idea. I wanted to write a book, or I wanted to talk about women of color, but it was on me. You know how those ideas that you really want to execute, but you can't figure out quite, and you haven't given yourself permission. It wasn't until I spent a week in Havana with this group of women, and they were, a lot of them were 10, 20 years older than me, and they said, "Aimee, we want to see the country that you describe, and we are backing you." And the last night, we went around at dinner, and everyone told me, "We're behind you." And that was my first group that supported me. It was funny. It was in a group of women that encouraged me to step fully into my own leadership and to build She the People. And Since that time, which was 4 years ago, till now, I truly am living into the life I was born to live. And if I can just leave you with one thing, that is the beauty of women of color coming together. When we see that happen, it's a miracle, given that this country was founded to never include us or to oppress us. And the fact that we are now making our government see us and hear us, insisting that our vision and our issues and our hopes and dreams are important, and demonstrating that we have the ability to not only have other women of color vote for us, but a multiracial coalition of voters and organizers backing us, that the possibility has opened up for us. So I encourage everyone, with that voice in your head, the things that you want to do, is just go for it, because the country needs you right now. The country needs you, and we need each other.
One more question from Dr. Hancock.
Sorry to make you stand back up there, but I did have a quick question, just about, because you were talking about having the opportunity to run. And I think what I hear a lot of women of color talk about, or be told by the major parties, it's not your turn, wait your turn. That happens a lot. And then I also think about redistricting and how districts are kind of carved up and then they become, right, someone else is waiting for that district, or someone's kind of in waiting. And so could you talk about how women of color kind of not necessarily get impacted by redistricting, but why they should care about redistricting as much as they care about the Supreme Court or other kinds of things?
Yeah, I hear a lot from women who aspire to serve their country in public office, that they were told to wait their turn. And different people will tell them that. Sometimes it's a consultant who works for a lot of big campaigns. Sometimes it's someone from a state or local party. Sometimes it's someone who's in office right now, who's supposed to be building the pipeline, even someone that might look like you, and they're like, you're not my person. You're too young. You don't know, I don't think you're electable. Whatever it is about you, you're not worthy. I hear that a lot. And I'm going to tell you that the women in Congress that we know, that were elected in 2018, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, 2020, Cori Bush, who comes out of, is a nurse, comes out of a Black Lives Matter organizing. I mean, to a person, Rashida Tlaib, all were told, it's not your turn. So what do you do with that? First of all, expect to be told that, because we have a culture that doesn't value people who look like us, not necessarily. So how do we build power from that place? You have to build your own power base. The majority of women who are elected in office don't ride in on somebody's coattails. They form their own coalitions and actually bring new voters. I think about Ayanna Pressley. She's a congresswoman representing Boston. If you think about her situation, she brought a lot of new voters. She had to build a new voting coalition. When I think about the women who are running in places like North Carolina, a woman, Justice Beasley, is running in North Carolina for Senate. We have no black women in the Senate. How is she? She's not going to ride on someone's coattails. She has to build her own voting coalition and communicate and inspire voters. And a lot of times for women of color, we have to actually spend campaign resources registering our voters. And in the political ecosystem, actually campaigns shouldn't be registering voters. Campaigns should be talking to voters. But if there's no ecosystem of organizations around who are funded to register and make sure that voters who are like younger voters or people of color who are often ignored by the typical registration mechanisms, or they're not at all, then there isn't support for that. So you have to fundraise for it as a candidate and build your own. And that being told to wait, I think, is not legit. So can we just kick that to the side? Being ready is around, look at Stacy Abrams, okay? Stacy Abrams, I'm a huge huge fan of and was a big supporter of hers in her first run for governor, but I knew her from before that. And listen, before she ran for state legislature, she had moved to Georgia, and Georgia power is in Atlanta, but Georgia is a big state. There's Albany, there's other places. So what she figured out was where she was going to get her voters, and she wrote a 10-year plan. The 10-year plan included, and she writes about this, included where she was going to run. She wasn't going to run in Atlanta. She went to the suburbs. Where she was going to get her voters, the fact she was planning to be minority leader, and then runs for governors, and who knows where else she's going to go. And that's where we need to do. We need to plan how we are going to build power where we are, where and when. You tell yourself when you're ready, and don't expect you'll always win on the first run. And those things are very important parts of us being able to step into our leadership. I didn't get to the second part of your question, but I hope that's enough.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. And Aimee, thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspectives. I hope everybody is as fired up as I am. So my name is Charlotte White, and I'm one of the co-founders at Ready to Launch, and we're a new local nonprofit organization that is on a mission to diversify the staff pipeline in government and politics. We work every day to expand opportunities for women of color in the halls of our government buildings. We know that there are so many ways to build political power for women of color, and as the daughter of a Southeast Asian refugee, I could not be more passionate about creating a more equitable America for families like mine, and women of color are at the forefront of that. We are so grateful to USD Center for Leadership by Women of Color for partnering with us on this incredible conversation, and thank you so much to Dr. Anjmarie Hancock-Alfaro and her incredible team. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the moderator for tonight's panel. We are so honored to have Los Angeles City Council President Nury Martinez with us tonight. She is the first Latina council president in the city's history, the proud daughter of working-class immigrants. Council President Martinez is a leader who brings a family's first perspective and women's rights advocacy to her efforts on behalf of the families in her district and the rest of the city of Los Angeles. Without further ado, please give it up for our City Council President, Nury Martinez.
Oh my goodness, is it happy hour yet? It literally took me an hour and a half to get out here. I was in the Valley today, so Thursdays is the day that I spend in the district. And then on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is when I have council meetings, so of course I'm in downtown. So I apologize for being late, but I love when I get invited to USC. I think this is my second time this month, if not mistaken. I was here a couple of Sundays ago with a wonderful group of women who were launching their careers, and they were like young entrepreneurs and influencers, and I was so inspired by all their stories, but at the same time I felt so old, and I said, oh my goodness, these women are in the peak of their time, and they're just barely 25 years old, and they're launching their own companies and their own products, and they're all networking with each other. And I said to oh my goodness, I just think it's wonderful. It's wonderful. So it's really a pleasure of mine is to be here and talk to young people. Any chance? Hey, Effie, how are you, friend? So with that, am I introducing the panelists? Is that what I'm, okay. So let me put on my glasses, because I am 48 and now I need glasses. That's the other thing that it comes with aging, but that's okay. Why don't we start with our first panelist, Hwang. Diana Hwang. Diana Hwang is the founder and executive director of the Asian American Women's Political Initiative, the county's only political leadership organization for Asian American and Pacific Islander women. In 2020, Diana was the first political organizing director for She the People, a national network of women of color working to transform our democracy. Welcome. And our next panelist, Isel Cuapio. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Oh, wow. I have a very different first name, so I'm incredibly sensitive to making sure I pronounce people's names correctly. She is a radio video journalist and community organizer. Isel joined the California Native Voter Project in 2020 to support and advance the electoral justice work to increase Native political power in California. She led the campaign efforts to ensure a complete and fair count in American, Indian, and Alaskan Native communities across the country during the 2020 census count. Currently, she is leading CNVP's integrated voter engagement strategy to ensure Native and Indigenous communities in California are exercising and strengthening their political power for 2020 and beyond. She received her BA in Political Science and English from UC Riverside in 2017. Welcome. Give her a big round of applause. Next we have Patrice Marshall McKenzie. Born and raised in Pasadena, Patrice has more than 15 years of experience working with state and local government leaders, including members of the California State Legislature and LAAWPPI Board of Education. Patrice serves and leads in the greater Pasadena community through a multitude of volunteer and civic organizations, including Alpha, Kappa Alpha Sorority, Junior League of Pasadena, the LA Trust for Children's Health, the National Women's Political Caucus, the Greater Pasadena Area and LA County Democratic Central Committee, Marvin Dimley's African American Political and Economic Institute, AAWPPI, and the Los Angeles African Americans Public Policy Institute. Are you not that busy? Wow. So she chaired a successful $516.3 million school bond campaign to increase facility, technology, and infrastructure and spaces that support STEM curriculum. Welcome, Patrice. Next is my good friend, Helen Torres, is the CEO of the Hispanas Organized for Political Equality. She has been instrumental in the development and implementation of Hope's Leadership Institute, which I'm a proud alumni of, a program that prepares adult Latinas for their next level of civic participation. HLI has resulted in more than 180 Latinas being appointed to state and local commissions and over 200 Latinas serving in nonprofit boards to improve their local community. She joined the Public Policy Institute of California Board of Directors of 2019, having previously served on the PPIC Statewide Leadership Council. Torres is an advisor to projects such as the Shriver Report, a Women's Nation Changes Everything, a study by Maria Shriver in partnership with the Center for American Progress. Welcome, Helen. All right, so why don't we get started? I'm going to start with Diana, and maybe this is a question for all of you. Can you just briefly introduce yourself? I know I talked a little bit about your background, but can you tell us what drives you to do the work that you do?
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the tech here.
I was speaking without a microphone earlier. Somebody just turned it on.
We're just going to figure it out. Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be invited, so I'm really grateful to be here. My name is Hwang. I'm the founder of the Asian American Women's Political Initiative. We're the country's only political leadership organization for Asian American and Pacific Islander women. My story is that my first job out of college was as a State House aide at the Massachusetts State House. And I remember telling my dad, and he was so worried about me, I almost started crying. And he said to me, "You'll never be one of them." And I understood, and I think I've always understood, that was his immigrant experience in this country. And changing that for our community, this feeling of not being seen and heard, is what drove me to start AAWPPI 13 years ago. Along the way, we talked a little about running for office. I ran for the Massachusetts State Senate for a district that included Boston's Chinatown. And I ran because, for all of you who live in cities, including LA, with Chinatowns, right? Chinatowns across the country are disappearing. Like, especially in Boston, you walk around and you can literally feel the high-rise buildings like closing in on Chinatown. And, you know, from local office, city council, state rep, state senator, and at the time, you know, Congress, senator, and president, Chinatown was represented by all white men. And so I ran to fight for Chinatown. And the best way I can describe running for office, since we're all going there, right? It's really, it's holding two opposites, right? You have to be vulnerable in order to connect with the community, with voters, but you're a thing. People see you as a thing, right? And that's kind of like the toxicity, that's the tearing you down, that's all of those things. And so it was really hard, but I will say that it didn't win, because you don't always win the first time, but I want to just tell you one story about standing at the Chinatown polls the day of election day, and I was just reading voters. And this 7-year-old girl and her mother came to vote, and the mom said to me, I came to vote for you because you told me to. And I think that's when I realized that people are watching. You are inspiring people just by going for it, and people recognize, you know, bravery recognizes bravery, right? So, and then along the way, one of the greatest honors of my life was to be the political and organizing director at the People in 2020. And not for a campaign, but to turn out women of color to vote. And Aimee actually would always define women of color whenever we would send out an email or whatever as Black, Latina, Asian American Pacific Islander, Indigenous, Muslim. And not, you know, the term women of color is people define it different ways. And I think having this preeminent organization really, and Aimee talk about that, it made me feel seen. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face as women of color in building political power together. I was at the presidential forum, I was at the launch, and being in a room with all women of color, the energy just feels different, right? And I just come off a campaign where politics was war, right? And it was the first time I'd really heard about politics being about love, being about wholeness, like for real, like, right? And so it was just an incredible year for me. And then I came back to AAWPPI to stabilize it during the pandemic, and then the Georgia mass shooting happened, right? And that and the ongoing anti-Asian violence, I thought a lot about my dad, and I thought a lot about my dad's fear that as an Asian American in this country, I would never really be accepted. And I think for so many of us in the community, we really realized just how urgent it was to change the invisibility that is what makes Asian Americans, and continues to be, you know, a target of hate, right? It's still happening every day. It's not covered in the news anymore. But we have fear. So we have expanded nationally this year. We expanded to Georgia. We're expanding out to North Carolina, Texas, and California in the next 5 years. And they're all states where Asian American and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing population and can really make a difference. And so we are creating really what doesn't exist, this national infrastructure to activate, elevate, and mobilize Asian American Pacific Islander women across all stages of the political pipeline. So sorry that was very long-winded, it wasn't brief, but.
Okay, we'll just remind the rest of our plans together, because I have a series of questions that I think are really good. I'm going to be able to sort of, then you get into your personal experiences, but I want to hear from the rest of the panel.
Well, don't ever apologize for speaking and sharing your wisdom. And I'm just really excited to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Isel Cuapio. I use she, they pronouns, and I identify as Indigenous Mexican. And my parents immigrated from Mexico here about 30 years ago. And so really just, as you were sharing your fresh out of college story, I thought about mine. I graduated from UCR in 2017, and I went into journalism. And that world for me taught me so much. It was also a very male-dominated space, and I felt like I just had to fight tooth and nail. So I really feel like a lot of women that I have worked with and women leaders, femme-identifying leaders, can really resonate with that, of really taking up space in places where men have controlled the narrative, where they have been able to make the decisions. And through my time in journalism, I realized that I didn't want to be the one reporting the stories. I wanted to be at the center of organizing, and I think that's just stems from my my love of my community and my people. And so the reason that I do this work really is because there are not enough of these sorts of organizations who are even at the table, who are even knocking on the doors of American Indian and Alaska Native peoples and indigenous peoples from the whole diaspora, asking them, are you registered to vote? Even questioning, why is it that you don't want to vote? There has, historically we all know that many groups that are here, many identities have experienced mass genocide, our ancestors have experienced mass genocide, and there's a huge history of mistrust and a reason why Native people do not vote and do not want to participate in systems that have harmed our people. So for me, it was really important when I did find the California Native Vote Project to leave journalism, and I joined their team as a canvasser. So I was knocking on people's doors. I have a long time, I always feel like just even as a child, I was a community organizer. I cared deeply about, do my neighbors have food, access to healthy foods? Do my neighbors struggle to pay the rent? A lot of them do. And all of these conditions, the reason I feel so strongly about being in these spaces, whether it is running for office or knocking on doors, telling your relatives to vote, I just feel so committed to and responsible for people to show up and to be civically engaged and to really build a political home for Native peoples in California. Because, like I said, there are not enough people knocking on our doors. There are not enough people that look like us that are running for office, that are in these positions where they get to work for Nury Martinez's office as a campaign staffer, a field director. So we need more of us in those spaces, and that's why I do this work.
My name is Patrice Marshall McKenzie. I am an educator and community advocate who is really passionate about transformative community building. And for me, that comes in the way of giving people 3 pillars, and that is stability, service, and safety. We look at being able to give people the opportunity to have basic things like, good, safe housing, affordable housing, clean air, good jobs that provide a high quality of life. Everyone should have those things regardless to your zip code, where you come from, what your status is, or where you are in the world. I also believe that government should really serve people because it is a public benefit. And we have seen that when government does step up, that it does add value to our lives. So I really want to make sure that government is serving people well and that we are, holding government accountable at the same time. And then also in terms of safety, everyone deserves to live in a place where safety is delivered in a do no harm model. We all deserve communities that provide us with a sense of security, but you can do that without hurting people, without killing people, and without causing them to be afraid in their own homes. So those are the things that I'm advocating for and what I fight for and why I do this work. I also work to make sure that women who look like me have the opportunity to have tools and resources to serve in a multitude of capacities. The LA African American Women's Public Policy Institute trains women to serve in all varieties and all spaces of leadership. Some of them run for office, some serve on boards and commissions, others of them go on to be corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders, even better, just community leaders. But what we know is that in the 355 women across Los Angeles and this country that are graduates of our program, they are making an impact. We have elected women to school boards, to city councils, to the state assembly, to the state senate. Looking at a candidate running for Congress right now, we've had women who have been mayors, and we're looking at women who are serving in very, very high levels of leadership of elected office. And my vision as chair of this board is to make sure that we are running women who can win and lead and serve in every single one of the cities in the 88 counties across Los Angeles.
Good afternoon. So I know we're going to be talking a little bit about me, but I just want to put the spotlight back on our amazing City Council President, Nury Martinez. We're talking about power. And when, we talk a lot, there's going to be a lot of good discussions around the mayor's race, and I maybe not this panel, but in other panels. But in the city of Los Angeles, the City Council President is the most powerful position. And it is held by a woman of power, a woman of integrity, and a Latina, and I couldn't be prouder. So one of the things I love about the work I do about hope is that we get to celebrate Latinas and women every day. I have one of the best jobs. And the reason I ended up at the job that I have is I didn't realize in 3rd grade, when my family from Puerto Rico came to the United States, to Detroit, Michigan, to take care of my heart problem, because we had to go to a good doctor in Henry Ford Hospital. My single mother made that journey with me and my older sister. And I was, at that time, a witness to the discrimination and the sexual harassment that she had every day, getting on public transportation, being pinched, being asked to constantly repeat what she was saying because they couldn't understand her, being questioned why she was in this country. And that was my upbringing, as she tried to keep a job, tried to come home, take care of my sister and I was a very sick child. And so she had all the things going against her being successful. She had one thing, and that's why it motivates me, the love of her family. She was motivated every day by the love of her family. This changed a little bit when we moved out to the suburbs, where we were once in Detroit with a multicultural ethnicity, beautiful place. Yeah, we were poor, but we didn't know it. We just felt safe and loved. People spoke like us, looked like us. They accepted us to a degree until we got into other areas. We went to a suburb where we were one of 4 Latino families in a pretty large suburb. And my mother, who was always a champion and always fighting for us, started going inward. As my stepfather went to work every day, she tried to find networks, and there wasn't a network that supported her. And this really came to fruition when I was in 3rd grade, and she got a phone call from some mother to ask to bake something, and she just understood cake. And she took this beautiful cake into the classroom as her donation to this work. And the mother yelled at her because she asked for cupcakes and reprimanded my mother for not understanding the language. And here I am, seeing my mother shrink, physically shrink. And I stepped in between the 2 women, and I said, "How dare you? My mother speaks 2 languages, and this is a beautiful cake." And that's when I first found my advocate's voice. We are all advocates for the generations and the ancestors that we represent. We're all advocates for every woman that's ever been pinched on public transportation, has ever been told, corrected for her English. We are all advocates to ensure that women progress. And that's how I got to HOPE. I didn't realize it. It wasn't like I woke up and had this pathway planned out. It's just I kept on following my heart. And every place that it just didn't feel right, that I wasn't listening to my calling, I moved away from. But I learned from and built bridges. And when I landed at Hope 21 years ago, I knew I found a home. And I knew I found my calling. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Well, ladies, it just reminds me as to why we show up for women and why we should always show up for ourselves. I said I want to start with you. How do women of color lead differently, and who do we bring with us when we're in positions of leadership?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Women are so creative. We're smart. A lot of times women are underestimated and we get to exceed people's expectations. And culturally, for Native and Indigenous peoples, women are the matriarchs. They are the ones who are leading and are listened to. So, for us, especially the California Native Vote Project, our team is comprised of mostly women. And now we have, our staff is definitely growing. We were back in 2016, a team of 3, and now we're a team of 14. And we're a statewide organization, so we have hubs in Los Angeles, in Sacramento, hopefully in the Central Valley or Inland Empire. But the way that we lead, it's through our love for our children, for our identities as mothers, our identities as aunties, our identities as daughters, as sisters. And so I think that the way that we lead is so different than how men lead. We lead with compassion, with an understanding that we have multiple jobs than just being, let's say, running for office. We could be a mother, we could be a nurse tending to somebody our child who got hurt. We could be an aunt worrying about whether her kid is doing, or her niece or nephew are doing well in school or not. So I think that in that sort of sense, we lead differently, we lead with compassion, and I think that's why we're so powerful.
Diana, this question is for you. How do we build power in our spheres of influence? And how do women of color in particular build solidarity together in a country that often feels like we all live in silos?
Solidarity has to be intentional. Like that's number one, right? Like I think all of us, we all work within our own communities because our communities are different, right? They have different needs. We just launched a civic impact incubator program for low-income and immigrant AAPI women, and came out of orientation weekend with these really powerful stories. There are our fellows, they're formerly unhoused Muslim women, queer DACA recipients, right? They all talked about sexual assault, being sexually abused, being in abusive relationships growing up, right? One of the most poised one talked about mental health issues. I mean, that's, as a woman of color in this society. One of the fellows' moms, the dad left because she was born a girl, right? And this is a story that actually could be in any of our communities, right? Mm-hmm. This is what we do to women of color in our society, right? And I think each of us are working within our own communities all towards justice for all of our communities, right? So, but we are very intentional, right? Like we had a cross-racial solidarity conversation, training, and discussions, because we can't do it alone, right? So, I don't know, we build spheres of influence within our spheres of influence by just showing up, right? Telling our stories, connecting, and telling each other that you're worthy, right? Like I think the question that was asked before, like we lead differently because we see each other, right? We actually freaking see each other. And we tell our stories, we connect, and like we build spaces of love, right? Like, And so I think we are all doing the work, and we all have to be really intentional about knowing why we do the work.
Thank you. And Patrice, how does society change when we're in power? When women are in positions of power, how does society change, and how can we work with each other to try to get there and get there faster?
Society changes when women are in power because when women lead, they lead from a place of inclusiveness. Women are looking at what benefits the whole and not just the individual. So when Black women are leading, they're thinking about how do they include their moms, their aunts, their sisters, their kids, their cousins. It's definitely more of a familial sort of lens on who's not at the table, and that's always what kind of guides people. So when women are leading and we're in power, we're thinking about how is it that the decision that we make, who does it impact, who is able to have a voice in the process, and who doesn't have a voice in the process. And often who doesn't have a voice in the process is the person's point of view that needs to be front and center when you're making decisions. And women almost always have their keen eye thinking about what my decision means to the person who doesn't have a voice.
Helen, I think you and I have talked about this in the past. We're seeing a record number of women of color that are running for office, but we still have such a long way to go. We can even talk about that in our own city here in Los Angeles. On the city council, we've talked about this up and down the state of California. What is it going to take for us to get more women elected, get them elected faster? I mean, it's something that we sit around and talk. I mean, I've been on panels with you and we talked about this very same issue, because there is a record number of women of color across this country that are running for office. But we still have, I mean, the gap is so large. Even in Congress, I think we've made some strides, but we have such a long way to go. What is it going to take?
It's going to take women being at every level of power, and not just an elected power, but also business and the variety of nonprofits. Until we really have a pipeline that serves every sector, where women can be of support to each other, it also is going to take women really addressing the pay gap and the inequalities that it comes to making a living here. Because money is key in this conversation. And I love writing my little $50 checks and my little $60 checks. But someone that is straight in the middle class, that's what I can do, and it can multiply. But when we're talking about real power and big money, we need women at those seats at the table, and we have to advocate for it. It also means we cannot apologize for just one win. And we've talked about this too. We can't just be satisfied that we got one person elected or one person, appointed. We've got to be, no, we are this part of the population. We need 3 seats. Because, and we know this, so we got to count. When you're in those seats of power, you've got to gather support. And so unless we are, we cannot be satisfied with just one person on a city council, one person on a school board, one person on the Supreme Court. We've got to ask for more and not be like, okay, we're okay, we got our one. So we've got to be bolder, and this is difficult to do. We've got to be clear about the economic realities that we're facing. And we have to change the system. Because it's not just saying we want to be part of the system. We need to know that the system's not working, period. And it's okay to have those difficult discussions about how do you start changing it. But we'll do that tomorrow, right?
We'll get on it tonight.
Yes, exactly.
We feed our kids and we put them to bed and we get ready for tomorrow. We'll figure that out in the morning. One of the things that I often talk about with my women friends is this concept of a pipeline. But oftentimes it feels as though we're trying to find women at the very last minute, or somebody jumps into a race at the very last minute. But we know ahead of time, we already know where those seats are. All you need to do is put a chart and a timeline, and you'll figure out when some of these members are being turned out, when someone's probably projected not to run again. And so we should be now, today, have a list of women that are ready to go, that are ready to say, you're ready to go, you're running for the city council, you're running for the school board, and you're running for the state assembly. I mean, those conversations, I think I've been having those conversations for the past 9 years since I've been on the city council. But I feel like it continues to be part of the issue, is that we don't have a pipeline. And it's so much more difficult for women sometimes to make this decision. If you're lucky enough to have a partner that supports this, and you're lucky enough to be able to wait to have a family, if you're lucky enough to have childcare and someone to take care of all those things at home, then it does make it easier for a woman. But someone who has young children, who would probably be a phenomenal leader in the city legislature, has to take all these things into consideration. Can any of you speak to what that, as a woman, have you ever been in that position to say, I've got to juggle 100 different things, though I really want to run for office? How do I add just one more thing to my list of things that I got to get done? Because the reality is, Patrice, is some of us who are moms, or who are thinking of starting a family, men don't think about this. I tell this story, men can take a shower, put on a black suit and a red tie, they all think they're presidential material. They're already the president tomorrow, right? I mean, that's all it really takes. You give them a nice haircut, you give them a nice little trim, and they're ready to go. And so many times, women are having to think about, wait a minute, do I want to start a family? When do I start a family? And if I have a family, how do I make this all work? But that also can be said for any career woman nowadays. But Patrice, do you want to say something to that?
I do. And to your point about how men get up on Tuesday and decide they're going to run for office, they don't have to know what the job is, they don't have to know what the office actually does, but people vote for them because they project confidence. And women have all of that confidence, all of that knowledge, all that expertise right now. We are managing our households, we manage our careers, we're managing our families, we manage our communities. We're already multitasking in ways that people are not able to comprehend how we keep up every day. That same skill set is what makes you a valuable member of an elected body. You manage a budget at home. You're gonna manage that same budget in your government body, few more zeros, but it's the same concept. Money comes in, you spend money, you can't spend more than you have. So we already know how to do these things. What we have to do is get out of our own heads and say, yes, we can. Be okay with making that decision to do so. Pull your village together, and if you need to ask for help, which we don't do well as women, you have to ask for help. So if I need to watch Helen's kids while she goes out to a campaign event, that's what I do for her as part of my investment in her leadership, part of my investment in her success. If I need to call Isel and say, hey Isel, I need you to do X, Y, and Z for me, or I need you to go do this for me. That's part of the village, and that's how we build power. So all of these pieces and parts that we have in our own ecosystem right now, we pull all those things together to be able to make sure that we can run for office. Now, the other reality is that it's an economic decision that you have to make sometimes depending on where you serve and how you serve. And to Helen's point about the pay equity gap, we're already starting out kind of at a little bit of a deficit in terms of where we are financially, economically, et cetera. So to think about running for the state assembly where you may or may not be giving up like your highest earning years in your career to take a job that's probably already a pay cut and also doesn't provide you with any pension benefit for your retirement later, that's a real calculus to make. But sometimes if a few of us take that L for ourselves, the payoff for what it does for the next generation of women, the next generation of leaders, the next generation of Californians will pay dividends in other ways. So I say run now, don't wait, find your village, find your people, and you can do it and win.
Thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. And I do want to open it up to questions from the audience. Do you have a question? Stand up. And what's your name?
I'm Kat.
Hi, Kat.
Hi, Kat.
Hi, everybody. This is even the speaker. I'm just gonna talk. Hi. My question is, as y'all were talking and sharing your lived experiences and your vulnerabilities, it's so powerful and moving, and it makes me reflect on every time I've voted and forced my mom to vote with me. But in that tension, where I come from, a lot of the people that look like me don't necessarily have my same values, and it has been character building, to say the least. And when I guess in my disappointment of like, in their lack of, vulnerability or humanity in like immigration or economic resilience or uplifting their fellow women of color, it feels like a betrayal, but then I also feel like I'm betraying them, this woman of color who's running, who is not reflective of my values, and I feel always conflicted, right? Of like, I want to support my own community, I want to support my own sister, but if she is not, investing in a generation to see dividends that I want to see, like, how can I do that? And I was wondering, obviously we need to build the pipeline, obviously we need to overcome the scarcity mindset, because it's not just one Asian woman running, it's not just one Latinx woman running, it's multiple folks. How do we uplift the pipeline faster, which I guess is everyone's wish, but also how do we, I guess, deal with this tension within our own community of women who look like us, who look like our families, but don't represent who we actually are. This isn't easy,
I'll try it. I think you just have to be okay with that. You just have to be okay with that. Because you have to be true to who you are and your values and how you want to see. And I love how Aimee was talking about a vision for the United States. And you have to support that because you have to be true to yourself. I am the biggest cheerleader for every Latina. But when I get in that voting poll, who I vote for is for the person that has my values and that's going to move from my understanding of the community forward. We're in an incredibly tension-filled moment in our country. And we have to be able to figure out how to discuss these major issues like immigration that's coming up before us. What does it mean to really support working families? But we also have to ensure that we're standing up for our values in a respectful way too. So I think, I don't mean to be harsh with this, but just be okay with it. Just embrace it. Embrace it. Find your tribe. My mother and I see the world very differently, and I will always be there for my mother. But I always laugh at her and I tell her, "Mommy, I moved you from Michigan, which is a purple state, to California, where your vote's going to be always canceled, my friend." So you got to be okay. Find the humor. It's okay. So that wasn't Helen, the executive director of a nonprofit. That was Helen as a good friend talking to you.
I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Right here.
Hi, I'm Sunita. The panel's been great. Thank you for moderating and hosting this. I did want to just say one thing that as a former candidate for office, I'm actually working on a study that
Can we clap for that?
I actually reached out to Diana because I'm actually doing a study on violence and harassment against AAWPI women candidates and electeds. And so I wanted to quickly ask the panel to speak to the issue of safety and security on the campaign trail and also in office. And are there any programs or funding? And since we're in an academic setting, since this is a study, I'm going to just politely hint that there may be a role for USC in the study, but it's not there.
That's an excellent question, even for women who are currently serving in office. How scary it has become to me. Absolutely, I'm going to write a book about that, by the way. Anybody want to speak to that on the campaign trail?
I don't want to hug it. I've never been on the campaign trail, but I could tell you what we're looking at HOPE. So we do have, our city council president has experienced this personally. But we have probably about 5 women that are in various elected offices where they've had to have security come to their homes, be outside of their homes. This is a real threat to our democracy. And we have to see how rules and laws are addressing this, because fear is what's happening in Central America, and where you see less and less people actually running for office because of fear. And this is another arm, another tool in a very negative space that's being used against our community. And we should study it. We're looking at HOPE about how we start training our elected officials that have gone through the program about what they should be asking of their police force, of what kind of laws they should be passing around public meetings. We had one woman report that her stalker showed up at her fundraiser. And even though she went through the courts and whatnot, because he didn't physically threaten her, she couldn't put, what is that when you ask?
Restraining order.
The restraining order. So we've got to look at the laws of this, because this is at the core of our democracy. If if this becomes more of a weapon against women, we will see less women running. So fear is a horrible tactic, and we've got to address it.
It's a really good question, and I just flash back to like all the times that I actually felt really threatened when I ran, right? And it is being used as a tool, right? Politics is war, and it's both like mental, people try to get in your head, and if you're a woman, like it's pretty physical, like people are bigger than me, right? So I can think of a number, like, and some of the laws, to your point, like my home address was like printed on the ballot. Right? So it's like, hello, I'm right here. And so I do think that there is a real, this is why we need more women of color in office, right? Because men are not thinking about this, right? But I remember being at the polls on election day as well, and having one of my opponent's supporters, like literally a bunch of men, right? Like crowd me, right? And it's hard because you're also, again, a thing, right? So you're public and you can't be freaking out, right? So I remember calling some of my supporters who were like carpenters, right? And having someone stand with me. So I felt safe. And like, that makes me feel a little weird that I had to like go call a dude, right? To come stand with me. But, Michelle Wu in Boston, she basically passed a mask mandate, and there were protests outside her house at 7 a.m. every single day, like calling her names filthy, like racist things. And one of the beautiful things I saw was Ayanna Pressley standing up and saying, this is not okay. And like a bunch of women of color in Boston signing a letter saying like, we see this happening, we're naming it, and we support you. So I don't have thank you for having a good like actual like policy stance, but like it's true, and I don't know.
Can I say a little bit about this, because I'm really bothered by what's happened to women in office. So we have examples like the Michigan governor, whose hung jury there was a hung jury, the feds tried to prosecute the people who tried to kidnap and kill her. So those guys are sort of, I don't know what's going to happen to them. You got the Secretary of State in Colorado, who's been threatened significantly by the President of the United States, by the way. We've got London Breed in San Francisco, who's had her own examples of what's happened to her. We've got Nora Vargas, who's on the Board of Supervisors in San Diego. We've got Michelle in Boston, who just passed the same ordinance that I adopted last year to protect myself from these people who were coming to my home at 6 in the morning, at 10 o'clock at night. And I know that a lot of times, sometimes we think it's sort of the far right, but it's also the far left. It's both. It's both, and it's got to stop. Because no matter what the issue is and how upset you are about the issue, there's a place and a time for you to have a disagreement with me. The place and the time is not my home at 6 o'clock in the morning. It is not yelling at my kid, calling me the C word. That is not okay. Nora Vargas oftentimes gets referred as a bitch when she's conducting public comment in her board. I think they call it the C word, the B word, you name it, they call me those things, both in public comment during meetings, by the majority of them, these folks are men. And they do it in your home. And so the ordinance that we passed last year is to keep people 300 feet away from your property so that these people can stop coming to your home. And it doesn't matter what the issue is. We can debate homelessness all day and night. We can talk about crime. We can talk about canceling rent. We can talk about eviction moratoriums. We can talk about masks and vaccines. The time and the place is not my home. And I think to Helen's point, it's becoming more and more clear to me that women in positions of power, particularly women of color, are being taken to task and are being made examples of, because we're not leading the way these men would like us to lead, and that is a huge problem. And I think we need to talk about it. I've shared my stories with the media. Not enough is being said about this. I read a couple of stories on London and what she's had to do, but not enough is being said about this, and we're not making examples of these people who are constantly threatening our lives and those of our families, and that is not the reason we ran, and that is not the reason we serve. So thank you. I love the question. I just had to sort of chime in because I would like to be a part of any study or anything that you're writing, because I have examples, videos of men that have gone to the feds because they're scary. It's scary, and my family did not sign up for this. My neighbors did not sign up for this. And so to bring this to your home, it is your home is your sanctuary. It's a place where it's your home, and you should feel safe in your home. And it became very clear during the last 2 years that my home is not safe anymore. So with that, I want to give our panelists a big round of applause. Inviting me to be part of this launch and be part of moderating this wonderful panel, and I look forward to working with each and one of you in the future. Thank you very much.
So I'm just here to say thank you again for joining us. Thank you online. Thank you for joining us in person. We are going to get one short photo, and then please do say hello or something like that if you have additional questions. We're just thrilled that you're here. So thank you, and please sign up and we will be part of this semester.
Photo? That's right.
Okay, so just gather together. We've got Calvin right here.
Should we have
go
the-
in front of
Come on.
Yeah, just go in.
You. Okay. Yeah, let's go to the picture.